It took me many years to understand that the silence inside a home can scream too. My whole life I served, with love, with sacrifice, with a devotion I didn't even know I had. I made hot meals, washed dirty clothes, gave up myself, and all that, believing it was normal, that this was what it meant to be a mother. But one day, while listening to my daughter-in-law call me the help in front of my own son, I realized they didn't see me. I was just a useful body, a comfortable habit, and worst of all, my son wouldn't lift a finger for me. It was in that suffocating silence that the truth arrived, cold as the kitchen tile at dawn. I discovered that he was never really my son, and that's when my true story began. If you've ever felt like a stranger in the very home you built, stay with me until the end. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about waking up, about returning to yourself. And if at any point this story touches you, comment below. I too needed to find myself again, because we only heal what we can name. I know many people might not understand, but loving too much can also make you sick, especially when that love becomes obligation, becomes invisibility. And that's how my story began. Or rather, how my pain began. When my son was born, I thought I'd been given a gift from God. I remember the moment they placed him in my arms. He cried softly, as if he were still trying to understand the world, and I wept as if I'd just found a lost piece of my own soul. His cry became my life's mission. I was young, scared, without a husband present, without family nearby, but all it took was looking at him, so small, so helpless, for everything to gain color. I promised myself I would do the possible and the impossible, that he would never go hungry, never feel cold, that I would be both mother and father, comfort and guidance. In those first years, my life revolved around him. I woke up before sunrise to prepare his snack, rushed off to work with my pillow-marked face, and returned only at night. But when I opened the door and saw that toothless grin waiting for me, everything was worth it. I forgot my exhaustion. I forgot the ache in my feet. That smile was my gold medal. There were days when I came home so tired I could barely take off my shoes. But as soon as he called me to play, I'd sit on the living room floor and become his superhero just to hear him laugh. And so many times I fell asleep on the couch with him in my arms while the beans burned on the stove. It was a love that both emptied me and filled me at the same time. When he turned 7, I threw a simple little party with chocolate cake and balloons. He ran over to hug me and said, "Mom, you mean everything to me." I kept that like a precious jewel. In my mind, that love was eternal, unconditional. But over time, something started to change. First, there were the silences. Then, the hurried glances, the curt replies. He began to drift away, slowly, like someone who doesn't want to hurt you but doesn't mind if they do. And I started to shrink, trying to fit into the spaces he left for me. In adolescence, he no longer wanted my opinion. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence. He'd laugh contemptuously at my stories. I thought, it's a phase. It'll pass. But deep down, each of those small rejections was like a jab to my chest. Even so, I stayed. I kept washing his clothes, cooking what he liked, tidying his room, even when he left everything purposefully. Scattered, as if to say, this is no longer your role. And I continued, because that was what I knew, to be a mother. I remember one specific day. He must have been about 19. I spent hours preparing a special lunch, because it was his first day at a new job. I used the best tablecloth in the house, arranged a little flower on the table, made fresh juice just the way he liked. When he arrived, he didn't even look at me. He said he'd already eaten out with friends. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't notice the effort I'd made. I stood there in the kitchen, watching the food cool, and I thought, am I expecting too much? Is a mother's love really given without return? And for the first time, a doubt pierced my mind like a cruel whisper. Does he love me? Time passed, and the small indifferences became routine. When he got a girlfriend, I felt a little relief. I thought maybe, with another woman around, he'd learn to be more polite. But that's when everything truly started to get worse. The first time she entered our home, I made coffee, put cake on the table, tried to be kind, and she didn't even greet me. She pretended I didn't exist. I swallowed hard and smiled anyway. because I was raised not to offend anyone, because I thought it was just the beginning, that she would get to know me eventually. But what I didn't know was that she had already labeled me before hearing my voice. To her, I was just the boyfriend's mother, a simple, uneducated, outdated woman. And that view became law in my own house. They started dating seriously, and little by little I lost my place. First, they stopped listening to my opinion. Then, my room became storage for their things. My belongings began to disappear. A dish towel, a mug, an old photo. Everything vanished, as if I were being erased bit by bit. When they got married and decided to continue living with me, I accepted. Out of love, out of attachment, out of fear of being alone, and out of foolishness too. Perhaps I thought having a full house would be good. But what I didn't know was that my home would no longer be mine, that my life would become an extension of their routine. I started hearing phrases like, "Could you have dinner ready by now? This place is a mess. The dishes are still dirty. Ma'am." They no longer called me mother, not even grandma, when a baby was born. It was always ma'am, distant, cold, as though speaking to an employee. And I obeyed. I got up early, prepared, everything, cleaned, even with aching knees, even with blurred vision, because I believed it was my role, that a good mother is one who serves, who endures, who erases herself. But deep down, I wasn't living anymore. I was merely serving. There was a day he came home from work, and seeing me sweeping the living room, said in front of her, "You could at least do that properly." And she laughed, a dry, mocking laugh. That cut me deeply. I froze, broom in hand, not knowing where to go, as if the house where I raised my son no longer had a corner for me. And still, I stayed, because deep down, I thought I could still fix it. That perhaps, with a little more effort, with a little more silence, he would return to being that little boy who hugged me tight and said I was everything to him. But that boy never existed, at least not the way I imagined. And it was only much later that I understood why. The worst loneliness isn't being alone, it's being surrounded by people and feeling unseen. I spent all day in that house, taking care of everything, everyone, yet it was as if I were made of wind, a wind that cleans, that tidies, that cooks, but that nobody notices. The silence began to suffocate me. They talked among themselves as if I weren't in the room. They laughed at inside jokes, made household decisions without consulting me. They even changed the color of the living room walls without asking me. It was as though I had died, and only my body remained to perform automatic tasks. One day, I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone say, "His mother is like a cleaning lady who doesn't charge." Those words pierced me. I didn't cry at the moment. I just went to the bathroom, sat on the edge of the empty bathtub, and stared at the floor for about 15 minutes. I felt dirty, used, a cleaning lady who doesn't charge, after everything I'd done for them. And the worst part, my son said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't correct her. Sometimes he even agreed. "Oh, Mom, you're overreacting. She's just tired." Always an excuse for her, never a gesture for me, never a look of compassion. I began to wonder, did I fail so badly? I started doubting myself. If I complained, I was dramatic. If I remained silent, I was resentful. If I cried, it was emotional blackmail. Everything I felt was diminished, rebutted, thrown away. They didn't fight with me. Worse than that. They ignored me, and that kills more than a scream ever could. There was a day when the water supply went out in the neighborhood. I got up at 5 a.m, grabbed 2 buckets, went to fill them at the neighbor's house. I returned with back pain, dying of thirst. When I arrived, she complained the water was lukewarm, and he said, "Oh, Mom, couldn't you fill it properly?" Something snapped inside me, a crack that couldn't be mended. I walked to my room and stayed there, quiet, without strength even to cry, just lying there, staring at the ceiling. And that's when I began to feel a different kind of emptiness, a deeper hole, a silence that wasn't peace. It was an absence of self. And you know what hurt even more? The good memories, because they stayed alive inside me. I still remembered the day he fell off his bike and ran into my arms saying, "Only you know how to heal, Mom." I clung to those memories like someone trying to hold sand in her hand, and it slipped away. I began talking to myself, conversing with God, the walls, the plants. I started writing little notes to myself, just to feel I still existed, that there was still someone there. One day I wrote in an old notebook, "If I disappear, they'll only notice when the sink clogs," and I closed the notebook as if burying a secret. But the worst was yet to come. The deepest wound hadn't been revealed. And when it finally surfaced, it brought with it not only pain, but the answer I didn't want to have. I always knew deep down that something was wrong. It wasn't just ingratitude. It wasn't just disdain. It was as if there were an invisible barrier between me and my son, a barrier that love couldn't cross. I gave everything of myself, and he gave me nothing. Not affection, not remembrance, not even the slightest respect. But I never dared to consider another explanation. After all, I gave birth to him. I breastfed him. I cared for his fevers, his colic, his fears. What other truth could there be except that he was my blood and my flesh, until the day something unlikely happened? It was a random morning. I was organizing an old drawer in my bedroom closet, one of those cleanings we invent to distract from the pain. In the back of the drawer, I found an old, faded cardboard box. Inside were his birth documents, the maternity card, the identification bracelet, and an old photograph, yellowed by time. On the bracelet was the hospital's name, but one detail caught my eye. The handwritten name wasn't exactly his. The surname was incomplete, and the handwriting was different. I was intrigued. My heart began to pound. It felt as if something was about to emerge from the darkness. I put the bracelet back, but that unease didn't go away. The following week, when I went to the health post to update our registration, I mentioned the hospital where he was born, and the attendant, casually, spoke of an old case of baby swapping at that same hospital around the same time. She laughed as she told it, like an old piece of gossip. But I froze. I asked for details. I investigated. I did the impossible to access the records. I spent sleepless nights, throat tight, stomach burning. I didn't know what I was looking for. I only knew I needed to know. I obtained a copy of the records from that period, and there it was, 2 births at the same hour, 2 mothers, similar names, 2 swapped bracelets, and among them, my name, and another name, of a woman I had never heard of. I stood there holding those papers in my hands. The world spun. My son, or rather, the one who had grown up as my son, wasn't my biological child. He wasn't my blood. He wasn't born by my womb. And suddenly, everything made sense. All the coldness, all the rejection, all the absence of a bond. But that didn't bring me relief. It brought me pain. A pain so deep, it seemed to run down my spine. I didn't want it to be true. I didn't want to have loved someone who wasn't mine. I didn't want my life story to be a hospital's mistake. I called him that day. His voice on the other end of the line was curt, hurried. As always. I wanted to tell him, but I couldn't. I froze. How do you tell someone they might not be your child? How do you explain that despite all the contempt, love still remained? I hung up without saying a word, but something inside me had changed. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. For the first time, I understood that perhaps I had never been the mother he expected, and he had never been the son my heart had chosen. I cried for 3 days straight, real tears. With sobs, unable to eat, too weak to get out of bed. I looked at old photographs and felt an unbearable mixture of love and deception. It was him, my boy, but it wasn't mine. And what do you do with the love that's left over? What do you do with birthdays, fevers, and hugs you truly gave? I wanted to give it all back, but there was nowhere to return it. The past can't undo itself, and love, when it's real, can't be nullified by a DNA test. I tracked down the other mother. Yes, the woman who gave birth to the child I raised. I found her name in the records. I discovered she lived in another town. I saw a photo of her online. She resembled me. Simple, with a tired expression. My soul froze. That child was my flesh, and he didn't know it. He grew up far from me. Perhaps he also felt that void. Perhaps he also experienced rejection, not understanding why his mother kept her distance. Perhaps he too was wounded. I thought about finding him, about telling him everything, but a paralyzing fear took hold. Fear of rejection. Fear of not being accepted even by my own by blood. Fear of stepping into a new pain without having healed the old one. I returned home carrying a ticking time bomb in my chest, and I continued living there, with them. The wired children. They knew nothing. They continued treating me like trash. And now, on top of everything, I knew there was neither a bond of blood nor of soul, that the whole house was a lie built on my blind love. But I also realized something liberating. That love I gave was mine. It wasn't an obligation. It wasn't a biological duty. It was a choice. It was a sacrifice. I loved with my soul, and no one can erase that. No one can tell me that love was in vain. It was at that moment I began to understand. Perhaps the true child is the one who sees you, who honors you, who loves you back, no matter whether they came from your womb or not. And me? I began to see myself, to hear myself, to recognize myself. The truth destroyed me, but it also opened my eyes. It took a while before I could start breathing again after that discovery. The pain was so great that I felt as if my body had forgotten how to live. I went through the motions automatically. I woke up, made coffee, cleaned the house, pretended to listen, pretended to smile. Inside, I was just ruins. But it was on one of those dragging days, when everything seemed the same, that something different happened. I was in my room, alone, rummaging through a box of old memories. Inside, I found an old notebook with a blue cardboard cover. I opened it without expecting anything, and there it was, a letter I had written to myself many years ago. Hold on, the first paragraph said. You will one day look in the mirror and recognize yourself. I cried so much I soaked the entire page. It was my handwriting, my old pain. I had forgotten that letter, but it hadn't forgotten me. It was then, at that moment, that something inside me restarted. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a shout. It was a whisper, a breath of lucidity. I realized I had spent decades looking at others, waiting for love from others, begging for respect from others, and I had never, ever, stopped to look at myself honestly. I began to do that, little by little, to look at myself, at my wrinkled face, my calloused feet, my hands stained with detergent, and I began to see beauty, a beauty no one else saw, the beauty of a woman who survived, who raised a child that wasn't hers, who loved without knowing she loved alone. I began writing again. Every day, a little note. You deserve peace. Today, just breathe. Your worth isn't determined by who notices you. And I stuck them on the wall, the fridge, the bathroom mirror. Small phrases, but enough to keep me standing. And then came courage. The courage to begin saying no. The first time was almost a whisper. He asked me to wash his clothes. I looked at him and said, I won't. He didn't even understand. He laughed, thinking it was a joke. But I stayed seated, head held high. Inside, I trembled, but outside, I remained firm. The next day, I went to the market, and for the first time in years, I bought things just for me. Yogurt, cookies, hair cream, things they never ate. And I hid them in my drawer, like treasure. It was little, I know, but for me, it was a beginning. I also reconnected with an old friend from my youth, Marlene. She had moved away years ago and recently returned to the neighborhood. She recognized me on the street and invited me for coffee. I almost said no. I almost said I had too much to do at home. But something made me accept, and it was over that coffee that I heard myself again. Telling a bit of my story out loud made me realize how much I'd swallowed in silence. Marlene was shocked. She said I needed to leave that place, that it was abuse. But I still didn't see myself as a victim. I still believed the blame was mine. Only that, for the first time, I began to doubt it. Days later, she invited me to a women's gathering at church. I went, and there, surrounded by strangers, I cried like a child. A deep cry, the kind that cleanses. They spoke of worth, of new beginnings, of God's gaze that never turns away from us, even when the whole world does. That gave me strength, not the strength of revolt, but the strength of decision. I began doing small rituals just for me, waking up earlier and sipping my coffee on the porch, listening to the birds. At night, lighting a candle and giving thanks for what I still had, my life, my clarity, my capacity to love. And then, I decided to do something that would change everything. I sought out my true son. Yes, that boy born of me who grew up far away, bearing another woman's name, another childhood, another story. I found his contact on social media. It took me 3 weeks to muster the courage to write, and when I did, I didn't mention the swap. I only wrote, "You don't know me, but you might need to know me. My name is Maria Luisa, and I have something very important to tell you." He replied politely, wary, but polite. He said we could meet in a public place. I arrived shaking, hands sweating, half an hour early. When he walked into the cafe, I knew, even before he spoke. It was him. The way he walked, the corner of his eye, the gesture of his hand on his chin. He was my son. We talked for 2 hours. I told him everything. Showed documents, photos, proof. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I always felt something was wrong. I always thought I didn't belong to that family." And there, in the middle of that crowded cafe, he took my hand. It was the first sincere touch I'd received in years. And I cried. He cried too. We didn't know what to do with that information. We didn't know if we could ever make up for lost time. But we knew one thing. It was still possible to build something new. In the days that followed, he sent me messages. Short, simple, but genuine. "Hi, how are you? I tried that bread you mentioned. It really is good." Small things, but they warmed me inside. Things that reminded me I existed, that someone saw value in me. I also began reorganizing my space, my part of the house. I changed the bedspread, threw away old clothes, gathered all the old photos of the swapped son, and put them in a box. Not out of anger, but out of respect for the end of a chapter. Of course he noticed. And one day, in a fit of panic, he yelled at me. He said I was going crazy, that I should be grateful to have a roof over my head. And for the first time, I smiled. Not a mocking smile, a smile of liberation. I'm not the one in debt here. It's you who never knew how to see me. And I left, with a suitcase, and with my dignity. I left the house one late afternoon. The sky was gray, and the wind hit my face like a reminder. Life can be cold, but it can also be cleansing. I didn't take many things, just what I needed and what made me feel good. The quilt my mother embroidered, the notebook of my affirmations, a small Bible, and an old photo of me smiling in my youth. I wanted to remember who I was before I was used, before I was erased. I moved into a simple little room in the back of Marlene's house. She had a space she used for storage and insisted on making it ready for me. We painted it together, chose floral curtains, added the scent of lavender. It was small, but it was mine. For the first time in decades, I had a place where my presence was respected. At first, I struggled with the silence, the absence of pot clatters, of shouting, of demands, just the sound of my own breathing. But soon that silence became peace. I began to wake without fear, to sleep without a knot in my chest. I returned to cooking, but this time for myself, for my hunger, for my taste. I started attending the church women's group more regularly. Those women welcomed me as sisters. They didn't ask what was wrong. They just hugged me. They said, "You're not alone." And that, for me, was everything. There I learned to pray for myself, not asking others to change, but asking that I never forget who I am. I asked for courage to live my truth, even if it hurt. I asked God to give me myself back, and He did, little by little, in the details. My real son came to visit one Sunday. He brought flowers. He hugged me. We sat on the porch. No rush. He told me things about his childhood, about how strange he'd always felt in his own home. I listened with pain, but also with relief, because I realized that bond, though lost for so many years, could still be woven again, strand by strand. We walked slowly. I didn't try to mother him as before. I didn't make demands. I simply showed up, and he did too. We exchanged messages, laughter, even confidences. One day he said to me, "When I met you, I felt my soul finally come home." I cried afterward, because that was it. That was what I had always longed to hear. And what about the other one? The swapped son? He never called, never reached out. When he learned I had left home, he stayed silent. Maybe he felt betrayed, maybe relieved. I don't know. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that for the first time I did something for myself, for the woman I was, for the mother I was, for the soul I almost let die. I began to dream again, not of grand futures, but of small desires. Crocheting, planting herbs on the balcony, sipping hot coffee to music. Simple things that remind me I'm alive, that I have worth, I wrote myself a letter, like the one I found years ago. In it I said, "You came back. After everything, you came back to yourself. And now no one can erase you." I folded it carefully and placed it in my drawer, because I know that one day I might need to read it again. Today, when I look in the mirror, I still see scars. But now, each one has a name, a story, and carries a reminder. I survived. I loved. I was wronged, but I was also brave, and that no one can take from me. Now I wake up early, but not out of obligation. It's because I love the sound of birdsong and the soft morning light through my pale curtains. I make my coffee slowly, sit on the porch, and breathe deeply. Sometimes I can't believe I'm alive. Not alive just biologically, but truly alive. Present in myself. Free. It wasn't easy to get here. It took decades for me to understand that a woman's value isn't measured by how much she serves others, but by how she recognizes herself when no one is watching. I spent half my life wanting to be seen, wanting validation, wanting the love I gave. And the other half, I will live whole, even when there's no applause. So much changed after I left that house. I still remember it, not with anger, but with astonishment. Astonishment at having endured so much, for so long. How can someone spend 30, 40 years in a place where they're not loved, and still believe it's home? Because they taught us that a good woman endures, that a true mother erases herself, that love means never giving up. But they never told me that sometimes giving up is survival, that leaving the table where they don't serve you is dignity, that turning your back on those who mistreat you is a sign of clarity, not resentment. At first I felt guilty. Guilt comes like a shadow, telling you that you're ungrateful, that you overreacted, that you should have tried one more time. But I had already tried, 1,000 times, and none was enough, because it never depended only on me. It never did. After a while, the guilt turned into silence, and the silence turned into peace. I reorganized my routine. I signed up for a craft course at church, made new friends, returned to writing, chronicles, letters, memories. Some I share with the group. Others I keep just for myself. They're pieces of my story that I now make sure are recorded, because for years, my life was invisible even to me. Today, I no longer let anything that is mine be forgotten. One day, walking in the park, a woman stopped me. She said she knew me from church, that she'd heard my story. With tears in her eyes, she said, "You saved me. I'm still there, in that house that isn't mine either. But now I know I can leave." We hugged. We stood there in silence, a silence of sisterhood, because only those who have been invisible know what it is to feel truly alive again. My real son remains present. Bit by bit, we're forging a new bond. Without rush, without demands, he invites me. To lunch, sends me messages, listens to me. Sometimes we just sit in the square, watching people pass by, and that's enough. We don't need to chase lost time. We're building the time we can have, and that is a miracle. He called me Mom for the first time 3 months ago. We were laughing about something silly when he stopped and said, "Mom, you always had this way of making everything feel light." And I cried, not just for that moment, but for every time I longed to hear that word, and it never came. For every time I was called ma'am, maid, drama queen. Now, no more. Now I am mother. And more than that, I am woman, I am soul, I am story. As for the other one, the one I raised who wasn't mine, I hold no more resentment. I expect nothing from him. I wish him no harm. I simply distanced myself. I understood that love isn't holding on to those who destroy us. It's knowing how to let go with lightness. And I let go. I let go without burden, without anger, without needing an explanation. Because the peace he never gave me, I found within myself. Sometimes I see him on social media. I see photos of him with his wife, with their little child, a grandchild I never knew. And that's okay. The emptiness that brings is real, but it's not destructive. It's just a longing for what never was. And you learn to live with it. Each day I cultivate my space. My little plants flourish on the balcony. My coffee never cools. My heart still feels pain, yes, but now it also feels gratitude. Because surviving was hard, but living, after survival, is a gift I wouldn't trade for anything. The other day, I wrote on my bedroom mirror in red lipstick, "You came back." And every morning, Before washing my face, I read that sentence. I look myself in the eyes, and I smile. Because I truly came back. I came back to myself. I came back to my story. And if you got all the way here, listening to my voice, reading my words, I want to tell you something. You can come back too. You can let go of what drowns you. You have the right to choose yourself. The respect they wouldn't give me, I gave it back to myself. And today, I sleep in peace, even without them. If you got here, it's because something inside you screamed too. Maybe it was a memory, an old pain, a word you never got to say. I want to thank you for listening to me, for allowing my story to find an echo in your heart. And now, I need to tell you something I, myself, needed to hear for so long. You are not alone. You are not overly dramatic. You are not ungrateful for wanting respect. You are not any less of a mother, because one day, you decided to care for yourself. If this story touched your soul, comment below. I too needed to find myself again, because when we put our wounds into words, they begin to heal. And if you know any woman who's lived the same, or still lives in silence, share this video. May it be a hug, a mirror, a hope. God has not forgotten you, and you deserve nothing less than respect.